Benji's laughter echoed through their modest home as Betty teased him about his stubborn attempts to patch up a rickety chair. For years, their bond had been the anchor that steadied them through life's hardships, and in their simplicity, they found joy. But that joy was fleeting. As Betty carried a basket of freshly harvested yams to the kitchen, her knees buckled and crumpled to the ground. The basket spilt across the floor, but the hollow stillness in Betty's eyes froze Benji's heart. He rushed to her, calling her name with mounting panic as the vibrant woman he adored lay limp in his arms. Hours later, the doctor's words pierced Benji's heart at the village clinic. Betty had a rare and terminal heart condition, leaving little hope for recovery. Medicine could not help her, and time seemed to be running out. Driven by desperation, Benji heard whispers in the village about a possible solution called Amina. She was an older woman who lived beyond the river and was rumored to have strange powers that could change the course of nature. Though he felt hesitant, Benji was pulled towards this possibility. His love for Betty was more potent than his fears, and he decided to find Amina, hoping she could save his wife no matter the risk. The light from a kerosene lamp flickered in Nuru's hut as Benji sat on a worn wooden stool, his hands shaking with fear and hope. Nuru, the village elder, leaned forward. "Amina, you say?" Nuru asked in a quiet voice, sounding serious. "If you want her bag, be ready to lose more than you expect." Nuru looked intently at Benji, gripping his staff firmly. He began telling stories about the bag, a powerful object that could heal people but required terrible sacrifices. "Many have looked for it," Nuru warned sadly. "None came back without bearing a burden." Benji listened closely, anxious with every word. Legend said the bag could cheat death, but using it had serious consequences. Families fell apart, lives were ruined, and people lost their minds, all because they tried to use it. Nuru looked at him with concern and said, "Don't go down this path, Benji. Let Betty find peace if it is her time." Nuru's warnings weighed on Benji, but the image of Betty as weak and helpless at home pushed him to act. His desperation made him less afraid. With determination, Benji stood up to leave. "I'll take my chances, Nuru," he replied, keeping his voice steady despite his inner turmoil. As he stepped out into the cool night, Nuru's words echoed in his mind. "The bag doesn't give, it only takes." Still, for Benji, the risk felt worth it. The path to Amina's dwelling was cloaked in silence, except for the sound of leaves rustling and frogs croaking by the river. Benji felt the weight of the village's whispered tales as he approached the hut. Smoke spiraled from its chimney, carrying the faint aroma of herbs and something darker, almost metallic. As he hesitated at the threshold, the door creaked open, and there she stood. Amina's presence was as unsettling as it was magnetic. Her piercing eyes seemed to see straight through him. Without a word, she stepped aside, allowing Benji to enter. The room was dimly lit, its shelves lined with jars of unknown contents. At the center of the room sat the bag, small yet ominous. its surface etched with intricate carvings that seemed to shift in the flickering firelight. "I know why you're here," Amina said clearly and firmly. She walked around the bag as if it were alive, gently touching its surface. "This bag can give you what you want, but you must pay the price," Amina explained. "The rules clearly. Never open the bag unless told to, perform its rituals without delay, and accept its demands without question." Her warnings suggested serious consequences, each more unsettling than the last. Benji felt doubt and fear, but the memory of Betty's pale skin, trembling form filled his mind. "What choice do I have?" he whispered weakly. Amina smiled softly and handed him the bag, as if it were heavy. "Then may you find strength where others have failed," she said quietly. As Benji clutched the bag tightly, he left the hut, feeling heavy with dread, but also filled with desperate hope. The bag's whispering presence felt heavier in Benji's hands as he sat alone in the clearing behind his home. The moon hung low in the sky, casting pale light over the hastily drawn circle of ash and herbs as Amina instructed. Benji's heart pounded as he opened the bag for the first time, revealing its eerily empty interior. Yet, as he peered into the void, a soft, otherworldly glow began to pulse within. A faint, yet commanding whisper filled his mind. "Blood must bind." Trembling, he pricked his finger with a rusty needle Amina had given him, letting a single drop of blood fall into the bag's depths. The glow intensified briefly before vanishing entirely, leaving the night eerily still. Benji's fear was outweighed by a fragile hope. This act, small yet unnerving, might hold the key to saving Betty. The following day, Benji woke up to find Betty sitting in bed. Her cheeks had some color, and her breathing was steady. She looked at him with confusion and joy. "I feel better," she whispered, her voice more clearer than it had been in weeks. Benji smiled, but he felt the weight of the bag under the bed on his mind. "It's the herbs," he lied, pointing to the small clay jar of leaves on the bedside table. Betty smiled back at him, and her gratitude made him feel guilty. As she got up and walked to the window to admire the morning sun, Benji felt both amazed and uneasy. While Betty's recovery was a relief, he couldn't ignore the bag lurking in the shadows. It had given him what he wanted for now, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the actual cost of the bag was starting to show itself. The days that followed, Betty's incredible recovery should have brought Benji tranquility. Still, a sense of unease loomed over him like a looming storm. At first, faint whispers came from the bag in the quiet of night. The sounds were unclear and complicated to understand. They became more pronounced when he sought to ignore them, pulling him from his slumber in a frigid sweat. Shadows moved unnaturally in the corners of his house, even without any light to cast them. His nightmares became vivid and horrifying, filled with depictions of Betty fading away, only to be succeeded by the bag radiating with an unsettling, pulsating glow. He attempted to dismiss the fear, convincing himself it was just the burden of guilt, distorting his perception. Yet, deep down, he recognized that the bag was sentient and observing. One evening, the bag's whispers became clear. and gave Benji a chilling command. "Give me something cherished." Benji felt a knot in his stomach as he understood that the bag wanted more than just his blood. It wanted a piece of his life, something dear to him. Confused and scared, he searched through his belongings until he found a faded wooden bird carving, a gift from his late mother. Giving it up made his chest tighten, but he knew he had to obey the bag. He put the carving into the bag's depths, and it swallowed the object whole, its glow flickering briefly before fading away. Benji sank to his knees, shaken but determined. Betty's health was still his primary focus. Still, the bag's demands weighed heavily on him, reminding him that his bargain was not finished. Kofi stood by the old wooden fence outside Benji's house, arms crossed and looking worried. He came without notice, wanting to see his brother and check on Betty, but something seemed wrong. Benji was quieter than usual, moving quickly and speaking carefully. His smile wasn't warm, and Kofi sensed that Benji was hiding something. During dinner, Betty happily discussed her recovery and how she could start doing simple chores again. Kofi kept an eye on Benji. "You've been quiet," he said lightly but with curiosity. "Betty's getting better. Aren't you glad?" Benji nodded quickly, his eyes glancing at the bag under the bed. "I'm just tired, Kofi. It's been a lot to take in," he said, avoiding Kofi's look. Betty's health got better, but she started having strange dreams. In the middle of the night, she woke up with trembling hands and described a dark figure in her dreams. It stood silently in the corner of an empty room. "It doesn't move or speak," she told Benji one morning, her voice shaky. "But it feels like it's waiting for something." Benji felt tight in his chest as he listened, and guilt crept in. Kofi noticed the tension between his brother and sister-in-law, so he became even more determined to find out what was wrong. "You're not yourself, Benji," Kofi said firmly while they sat outside later that day. "Whatever you're hiding, it's going to eat you alive." Benji tried to dismiss Kofi's words, but deep down, he knew they were true. His secret felt heavier every day, threatening to disrupt everything. The air in the cemetery was silent, broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl. Benji stood by an old grave, his hands shaking as he held a rusty shovel. Earlier that evening, the bag had clearly whispered its demand. Something buried, forgotten, and sacred. He had stayed away from the cemetery for years, feeling its pain, but now he had no choice. With each thrust of the shovel, he felt his determination weaken. The grave belonged to an elder he once respected, a storyteller who shared wise tales with the village children, including Benji. As the dirt fell away, Benji found a small carved pendant, its edges smooth from age. He paused, feeling the weight of what he had done. "I'm sorry," he said softly to the grave, his voice just above a whisper. He held the pendant tightly and put it into the bag. The bag glowed briefly with an unusual light before returning to its usual eerie quiet. Benji filled the grave again, his hands sore and blistered. He walked home under the pale moonlight, avoiding his reflection in the puddles. The bag's whispers were quiet for now, but his guilt felt loud. Betty watched Benji closely as he moved around the house. His eyes darted nervously to dark corners. He seemed like a shadow of his former self, mumbling and jumping at the slightest sound. While Betty's health got better, she felt uneasy. One evening, as they sat together, Betty said, "Benji, what's happening to us? I'm waking up from a nightmare, but you're falling into one." Benji forced a smile, hiding the guilt and fear inside him. "It's just stress," he replied weakly, avoiding her gaze. Betty was not convinced. Shadows in their home seemed to move when they shouldn't, lingering at the edges of her vision. The quiet whispers followed Benji wherever he went. One night, Betty woke up to find Benji standing at the window, holding the bag tightly and staring into the darkness. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice shaking. Benji jumped and quickly hid the bag behind his back. "Nothing. Go back to sleep," he replied sharply. But Betty sensed he was hiding something. Betty decided to watch Benji closely the next day to find out the truth. Meanwhile, the shadows grew darker and the whispers got louder, warning her to stay away. News about Betty's recovery spread quickly through the village. Many visitors came to their home to see how she had changed and to praise her strength and Benji's care. Betty's bright smile and laughter returned, filling their home with warmth. However, Benji stays in the background, feeling sad because of the secret he keeps. The bag felt heavier each day, and its whispers grew more urgent. At night, his dreams turned to nightmares, showing the bag consuming everything he loved and leaving only emptiness behind. The villagers were happy that Betty was healthy again, but noticed Benji was acting distant. Coffee became suspicious. "You're hiding something, Benji," he said during a visit, his voice quiet but serious. "It's not just stress. What did you do?" Benji lost his temper. "I did what I had to do for Betty," he shouted before walking away. Kofi's words stuck with him, and Benji realized he was starting to show his true feelings. Betty began to notice strange changes in herself. Even though she felt strong, her nights were filled with nightmares of a dark figure watching her. She kept these fears to herself because she sensed that Benji was also struggling. Their home, once warm and loving, now felt cold and heavy. The bag's whispers seemed to seep into all parts of their lives, turning their miracle into a growing nightmare. The bag said softly, "What binds you must be broken." Benji felt deeply sad as he understood what it meant. The bag wanted more than just his belongings. It sought a part of him. In the days that followed, Benji sensed that the bag was having an effect. His treasured memories of Betty began to fade, disappearing like mist in the morning sun. He could no longer remember how she laughed when they first met, or how soft her hand felt when she comforted him during tough times. Betty noticed something was wrong. "You've forgotten my favorite song," she said one evening, sounding sad. Benji looked at her blankly, unable to remember. "I've just been tired," he said quietly, but Betty didn't believe him. She reached for his hand, but he instinctively pulled away. This hurt her more than she showed. As days went by, Benji became colder and more distant. The bag's whispers filled the empty space where his memories of love and happiness used to be. Benji felt a brief moment of joy, but it quickly disappeared under the heavy weight of the bag. Not discouraged by Benji's earlier reaction, Kofi decided to dig deeper, believing that his brother was caught in something strange. For Benji, the bag felt heavier, not just in his hands, but in his heart. The love that made him agree to the deal now seemed far away. Even as he lost parts of himself, he held onto the hope that saving Betty would make everything worth it, even if it meant giving up everything.